Hello, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America. In the summer of 2020, CUNY received an historic gift of $10 million from the Mellon Foundation to drive change in all 25 of its colleges. A central element in this effort is BRESI, Black, Race, and Ethnic Studies Initiative. February of 2022, Chancellor Felix Matos Rodriguez greenlit the implementation phase of BRESI and then established a BRESI Council in March. The council is co-chaired by Dr. Hector Cordero Guzman and Dr. Judith M. Anderson. With us today are two of the council members, Dr. Tsedale Melaku, Assistant Professor of Management in the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College, and author of You Don't Look Like a Lawyer, Black Women and Systemic Gendered Racism. I love the title of the book. And we also have with us Dr. Anthony Browne, Chair of the Department of Africana and Puerto Rican and Latino Studies at Hunter College. Thank you both so much, and congratulations. That's a nice gift from the Mellon Foundation. Elizabeth Alexander, always one of my favorite people and favorite poets and writers, who is heading up the Mellon Foundation now. Tell us, Dr. Browne, about what you're able to do with this. You've already started implementing it, and you've got, a fairly good amount of money to do things with.
Thank you, and it's so good to be here. As you mentioned, $3 million of that grant from the Mellon Foundation is dedicated towards driving Black race and ethnic studies at CUNY. And so we went about a process of trying to figure out how best to use those resources. So we formed a commission, we had town hall meetings, we surveyed faculty, and so then we used that data to drive the areas that we would be focusing on. Certainly one is decolonizing the curriculum. Right? How do we make our curriculum more inclusive across CUNY? So we include non-Western perspectives, perspective of those who have been historically left out. So that's one area. Also, another area is students. How do we make sure that students are getting the mentoring, the programming opportunities, internships that are so critical? As we all know, CUNY has been a major engine of upward mobility in New York City. Many of our students are first generation, first in their families to go to college. And so CUNY allows them to join the middle class and then certainly assist their families and their communities. So we know that that is also very important. We also have a number of centers and institutes that do what we call public-facing programming. For example, at Medgar College, the Center for Black Literature does these wonderful conferences. The Center for Puerto Rican Studies in terms of scholarship and other kinds of research, archival work. So we want to make sure that these centers and institutes are properly resourced, and can do, and what we say, level up, if you will, be able to do it on a bigger scale. And so BRESI certainly allows us to do that. And also, critically important is hiring more Black, Latinx, Native American, Asian American faculty. We want our faculty to look like our student body. And so CUNY, certainly under the leadership of our chancellor, the grant allows us to make very intentional moves in that direction.
Wow. I note that you use the word decolonize, actually an entire university. That's a pretty strong word. What's going into that? Any resistance to that, given our current political environment?
Oh yes, most definitely. Black studies in particular really is the starting point, if you will, particularly as it became institutionalized in the late 1960s, challenging what we saw were dominant Eurocentric perspectives that often perpetuated white supremacy and negative notions about minoritized communities. And so decolonization is part of this larger project to decenter that dominance, if you will, and bring these perspectives. And I think I would say, and Professor Melaku would also agree, that because of Black studies, Asian American studies, Latino studies, women's studies, that followed Black studies, they have fundamentally transformed the liberal arts and social sciences. All right? And so that transformation, I would argue, challenges those in power. And we see that now in Florida, et cetera. But these debates are not new. We can go back, I would say, to the 1970s, if not earlier, where multiculturalism was viewed as problematic. Because again, it makes us rethink, or forces us to rethink, our notions about who we are as a society. And many of the myths, if you will, that serve certain purposes, but at the same time, perpetuates and marginalize various groups. So that's why I would argue that Black studies and these other area studies are viewed politically as problematic by those more conservative elements of our society. And I think that was also crystallized when we had the protests following the murder of George Floyd in 2020. Many, again, I tell my students, this was the largest mass protests in the history of the United States, surpassing the civil rights movement. And many of those young people were students who took our classes, using our concepts. And so, that engendered a backlash that we're dealing with today.
So, Professor Melaku, we come to you for the backlash. What are you seeing as you try to reshape a huge educational system that has many, first-time college students, people who've come from other countries, people who are not extremely wealthy. Most of the students who are in the CUNY system, one that I love, and we are, as you must know, watching this show, a part of the CUNY family. What is that backlash like that you're seeing now?
Well, I think just as Dr. Browne was saying, there oftentimes is a resistance to change, right? And giving students, faculty, staff an opportunity to be able to engage in this critical work, specifically targeting Black, race, ethnic studies within not just pedagogy, but in terms of how we are engaging in the climate within the university is incredibly important. I think there's a lot of support to be able to drive these types of conversations. We know that with the murder of George Floyd and the protests that ensued, there was a lot of statements that came out, right? A lot of public acknowledgement around trying to address racial and social injustices and really thinking critically around equity and what this means for us, not just the city, but also within our classrooms, amongst faculty, with staff, and trying to figure out what are some of the equitable steps that could be taken to really bring this to the forefront of discourse. And what BRESI does is it brings a university-wide lens to addressing these issues, not just with respect to having the conversations, which are super important, but also to figuring out how could we create a lot of the systemic change that we need to see to be able to streamline what equity looks like across the board. So backlash, I don't know if I would say backlash, I would say resistance though, because oftentimes change is painful, and recognizing how we play into creating these types of barriers for ourselves and for others is important. So having the conversation, and then really, what Dr. Browne has done and the Planning Commission has done is outline exactly where we need to target within the university to be able to address these structural issues. So if you're thinking about student experience, we're doing that. We're seeing how institutes are driving student-led research, right? We're seeing how student internships are really coming to the forefront of discourse. We're seeing how students are really taking hold of trying to create the changes that they're fighting in the streets, right? Bringing it into the classroom, but thinking about what this looks like in their everyday lives is what's super important.
Right. So we're lucky that we're in New York and we're part of this CUNY family, aware. I don't want to say woke because that engenders exactly the political discussion that's happening outside of New York. I'm going to give New York a break, because we're not banning books yet, I don't think. Although I'm, watching the news every day to find out if we are. But you're doing the work of integrating our history and bringing our history to the forefront, while there are those in the rest of the country who are trying to eliminate us completely from the history of this country. Dr. Browne, what? Do you feel that resistance?
Thank goodness not here in New York, but I have colleagues certainly in Florida and other states who have spoken about teaching and living in under a climate whereby their very research is questioned. I also have seen news reports, I'm sure you have, of faculty canceling classes out of fear of retribution. So that is, very troubling. New York certainly is a space whereby we have embraced these kinds of ideas, but we know it's not universal. And so part of the challenge is how do we support our colleagues in these states who are under duress currently. And, contrary to, so many principles that this country espouses about freedom of speech and so we're back in, McCarthy era banning books. Who would have thought that here we are in the 21st century that this would reoccur? So it certainly is quite distressing, but our history shows that, we possess the wherewithal to challenge and outlast those who try to, subjugate us. So, I get comfort, from knowing that history.
So, Professor, I want to talk with you about your book. You don't look like a lawyer, and you're at the business school, right? So the resistance to black women in particular in the world, in the matrix of this existence that we have in this country. Talk to us a little bit about that. You do look like a lawyer. No, go ahead.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that just the term in and of itself invokes a sense of exclusion, right? You don't look like is implying that, you don't look professional, right? You don't look like you belong in this space. And the book came about really because I used to work in a law firm, and I thought I was a corporate paralegal, and I wanted to understand why were there no black female lawyers in this space? What was it about the space that created this sense of exclusion or barriers to be able to find ourselves in these positions? And oftentimes I was met with, I was never mistaken for the lawyer, which I thought was interesting. Why? What was it about me that didn't allow people to see me as a lawyer? And so I wanted to understand what that meant, and I decided to interview black women lawyers who were working in these elite firms and asking them questions about how race and gender have impacted their trajectory. And it was a small population of black women lawyers, but partners in particular, who are in these leadership roles. And you could see this across the board, whether it's in the academy, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in tech or music industry, and we know what's happening in the tech industry right now. But I think it's fascinating when you think about what someone looks like and how you're attaching competence to that, confidence to that, some of the ways in which appearance and the perception of one's appearance could relegate them to a space in which they don't have access to resources and opportunity. And so, wanting to understand that in industries, whether it's in the law firm or in academia or in corporate environments, was incredibly important because we need to be represented in those spaces. And it's not the lack of desire or drive to want to be in those spaces, but there are structural issues coming back to systemic racism and sexism and the various ways in which women are really held back in those spaces, but particularly black women and other women of color who are having to navigate this. And writing a book like that, teaching students in a business school, recognizing what that looks like, having people see me in a position where most people may not necessarily see me and think I look like a professor. And I've heard that, from whether it's from staff or faculty or students. It's something that's important. And so that term itself, you don't look like, invokes this. And so having conversations around that and understanding why that is, and historically leading into what that could potentially look like, is super important.
So, Dr. Browne, you look like a professor, a historian and a researcher. I'm interested in the work that you're doing in environmental discrimination in this country. If you could talk with us a little bit, about that.
Okay. Well, currently I have a research project, book project, looking at gentrification in Bedford-Stuyvesant. As you know, Bed-Stuy for the longest was in many ways considered the largest black so-called ghetto in the United States. Then in the 1990s, things began to change. And now we have $2 million brownstones.
Isn't it like the richest, the most expensive place to live in the world?
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
but I mean,
$2,500
right.
Studio apartment. So the
Right.
question is, how and why did that happen? And so to answer that question, certainly history is important, the role of redlining in making Bed-Stuy this ghetto. And then the rezoning that we've seen, particularly during the Bloomberg years, and other policies that were designed to lure into New York City, middle and upper class folks, and how that process, if you will, collectively, has driven this rapid gentrification to the point where Bed-Stuy's black population now has dropped significantly over the last 2 decades. And so I'm looking at the impact of that on institutions, whether it be churches. As you know, Brooklyn is known as the borough of churches. What happens when your population is no longer there? Right? Other institutions, local businesses. So I'm interviewing current residents, former residents, new residents, business owners, to get their perspective, as well as looking at archival data that helps paint a picture of how we got to this point. And perhaps even more importantly, what can we do to preserve the character of Bed-Stuy, given these massive forces that are undermining, if you will, the character, if you will, that existed for so long. So that's one of the projects that I'm working on. I've also done quite a bit of research looking at poverty and education. So all of these are very much intertwined. Obviously, we've talked here about the importance of education as a driver of upward mobility, but what happens when we have, as my former colleague at CUNY termed it, ghetto schools that continue to marginalize a student's population. So how do we transform that? So that's some of the work that I've also been engaged in.
Right. Let's talk a little bit more. I mean, and I'm fascinated about that, the environmental piece, all of the work that that you're both engaged in. So for the students, what will this new money go to? If you can tell us about some of the, in more detail, about some of the projects that will.
Okay. Student research is very big. Many students want to go on. One of the things about having faculty of color is that students resonate to us. We come from their communities, we often live there, and so there's a connection. And many of them have never thought about being researchers or even being professors. And so BRESI money, obviously this existed before, but it allows us to do it bigger and better. Give students opportunities to do research with faculty, be mentored. Go to conferences, learn professionalization in those particular disciplines. And so this is part of the pipeline process, expanding and building upon what we've done before, giving students those opportunities.
And aren't you creating a PhD program too?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the things I'm very excited about also is the creation at CUNY for the first time of a PhD program. The working title is Black Race and Ethnic Studies. Many of our peer institutions here in New York and across the country over the last 2 decades have created PhD programs, whether in Black Studies, Ethnic Studies, and so CUNY has been an outlier. So this gives us an opportunity now to join our peer institutions and train this next generation of scholars who can make contributions, to scholarship, public policy, right? And also, again, engaging with the community. That's one of the things I love about CUNY. Our scholars, present their work and invite community members in. And so it's a reciprocal relationship that I think many institutions don't have that makes us quite special.
And Professor?
Yeah, I love that. I'm so excited about the PhD project, the PhD that's going to be available to students. I mean, one of the projects that I know and very excited about is what's happening at Baruch College right now under the leadership of Dean Mohan, where he and several other deans across the 3 schools, the Liberal Arts College, the Policy School, as well as the Business School, have created a curriculum that engages Black race and ethnic studies across the 3 schools so that students have an opportunity to take courses that are specifically designed to be able to engage Black race and ethnicity within law, within business, within policy, within the various liberal arts programs that are available. And this is really come about because of the Black and Latino Studies major that was recently approved under the work of Shelley Eversley. So it's super exciting to see that they are really focusing on creating space for students to be able to engage specifically on these topics, and doing it in a cross-disciplinary way, as well as within these various schools in the college. So having that collaborative work and seeing how students from the various schools can be able to engage with different faculty who are really focusing on this topic, I think is going to be not only, you know, transformative for how students start thinking about their learning, but how this applies to everyday practice outside.
Sure. So are you, I wanted maybe a slightly sensitive issue is that generally for most universities, colleges, whatever, the retention rates are not exactly things to send home, you know, notices of hip hip hooray. My guess is that this kind of enrichment of the program will encourage kids to stay in school if they can financially. And what are your thoughts in terms of being able to just finish the program?
You know, absolutely. Again, connection with faculty. That's why, again, faculty are so important, faculty of color. You know, I'm sure Professor Melaku can also share this. We've had so many students come to us and say, hey, I'm dealing with housing insecurity, food insecurity. I want to stay in school. How do I navigate this? And so we've been able to connect them with resources. So I've had students who have been able to get into the dorms, and so they're no longer housing insecure or homeless. Food pantry or, you know, SNAP assistance, helping them navigate those kinds of bureaucracies. So those kinds of interventions, you know, are critical to allowing, obviously, students to be able to complete their degrees in a timely fashion.
Yeah, I was just talking with the head of the Houston Food Bank. I think they feed like 1 million people. It's the largest in the country. And what they've started doing now is giving food scholarships to college students, you know, to supplement their extreme costs in many instances. I understand that the feedback from your students has been phenomenal to what's going on. Talk to us a little bit about your students and what they're saying.
Well, I absolutely love my students, right? I think that, I mean, that's the purpose, that's the point of being an educator, at least for me, to be able to not just interface with students, but really get to know them. I've had a wonderful opportunity to learn about their journeys and understanding and realizing that it's not just what's happening in the classroom, but everything that's happening outside that's shaping their experience, not just with CUNY, but how they see their future is super important. And so I'm a huge advocate for being able to recognize the individual, not just for who they are, but what it is that they want to do, and opening opportunity and space, which means resourcing them, right? So understanding what the institution provides, knowing what resources are available, seeing how you can direct them in those spaces, but also giving them space and agency to ask the difficult questions, to be upset, to get emotional, right? I think that this is part of the teaching and also the learning for faculty. To be able to interface in that way creates genuine connections, and so they want to come to class, right? They want to learn more. They want you to extend hours and like to sit and really talk to them about everything that they're interested in, but also things that they're questioning and that they're scared about and that they're learning. And I feel so lucky that I have the opportunity to be able to be there for them and them for me, right? It's a reciprocated relationship, and it's one that is probably the most important in my experience.
And Dr. Browne, in terms of scholarships that will be provided, I keep going back to the money, the money aspect of this, because you know, the cost is so extravagant, and the debt that's being engendered by so many people that will, you know, compromise their lives for the rest of their lives in some instances. So some of this money will go to scholarships for students, or?
Not scholarships. Certainly that's a huge area that we still have to tackle, and a huge public policy issue, not just here in New York, but across the country, as you know. CUNY, as you know, was once free. Until the mid-1970s, and but the tuition is still, you know, perhaps 1/10 of what Columbia or some of these other schools are, but it's still onerous for many of our students. And so there are a number of public policy areas, for example, the Excelsior grant that has existed now for a number of years, our students tend to have their tuition covered, but it's living expenses that becomes the major barrier to graduating in 4 or 6 years. And so many of them find themselves working sometimes full-time and being a student. And we know that that can be very difficult to do and graduate in a timely fashion. So if we can deal with the issue of housing expenses, transportation, food, we can certainly reduce time to graduation and allow students to thrive as students and not have these other commitments that can, again, be very difficult to navigate.
So how optimistic are you about what this infusion of support? I mean, that's a pretty big positive statement the Mellon Foundation has made about the CUNY University system.
Absolutely. I've been involved with Mellon since the inception of the grant. And again, I continue to be excited, about the possibilities. We know that this money could potentially be seed money for other projects. We want to make sure that these projects are durable, they outlast a grant, right, and have a long-lasting impact on the lives of our students. And so that's something I look forward to, and we're committed to making sure that we can, again, put a process in place to allow that to happen.
Well, we thank you both so much for being with us today. It's so encouraging, and because we're part of the family, we're like, yay, this is just terrific. And I wish Godspeed to you both and all of your colleagues in making sure that this is finished in a very positive way, because you've got outside resistance, if not downright opposition. So thank you very, very much for what you're doing, and congratulations to us all.
Thank you.
My guest today, Dr. Tsedale Melaku. She's an assistant professor of management in the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College, and Dr. Anthony Browne, chair of the Department of Africana and Puerto Rican Latino Studies. That's a wide swath of content there you're covering at Hunter College. To learn more about BRESI, you can visit cuny.edu. The program here is Black America. We thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you the next time.